Welcome to our YouTube audiobook series. Today, we present to you The Burning Secret by Stefan Zweig. This captivating novella takes us on a journey through the complexities of human relationships and the power of secrets. Set in a luxurious Austrian hotel, the story follows a young boy named Edgar and his mother, who are spending their summer vacation there. Edgar becomes infatuated with an older, sophisticated woman named Frau von Kakesvolve. The Burning Secret explores the themes of desire, manipulation, and the allure of the forbidden. As the plot unfolds, we witness the psychological dynamics between Edgar, his mother, and Frau von Kakesvolve. Edgar's innocent admiration quickly turns into an obsession, while his mother remains oblivious to the growing tension. The story delves into the depths of human emotions and the consequences of hidden desires. Stefan Zweig's masterful storytelling keeps readers on the edge of their seats as we are drawn into the characters' inner thoughts and motivations. The Burning Secret is a thought-provoking exploration of the complexities of human nature and the power of secrets. Join us as we embark on this literary journey, delving into the depths of passion, obsession, and the consequences of hidden desires. Whether you are a fan of Stefan Zweig's works or new to his writing, this audiobook promises to captivate and engage you from start to finish. So sit back, relax, and let the captivating world of The Burning Secret transport you to a time and place where secrets burn bright and desires simmer beneath the surface. Chapter 1. The Partner. The train, with a shrill whistle, pulled into Summering. For a moment the black coaches stood still in the silvery light of the uplands to eject a few vivid human figures and to swallow up others. Exacerbated voices called back and forth. Then, with a puffing and a chugging and another shrill shriek, the dark train clattered into the opening of the tunnel, and once more the landscape stretched before the view unbroken in all its wide expense, the background swept clean by the moist wind. One of the arrivals, a young man pleasantly distinguished by his good dress and elastic walk, hurried ahead of the others and entered one of the hotel buses. The horses took the steep road leisurely. Spring was in the air. Up in the sky floated the white shifting clouds of May and June. Light, sportive young creatures, playfully coursing the blue path of heaven, suddenly dipping and hiding behind the mountains, embracing and running away, crumpling up like handkerchiefs, elongating into gauzy scarves, and ending their play by roguishly perching white caps on the mountain tops. There was unrest below, too, in the wind, which shook the lean trees, still wet from the rain, and set the limbs a-groaning softly and brought down 1,000 shining drops. Sometimes a cool breath of snow descended from the mountains, and then there was a feel in the air both balmy and cutting. All things in the atmosphere and on the earth were in motion and astir with the ferment of impatience. The horses tossed their heads and snorted as they now trotted down a descent, the sound of their bells jingling far ahead of them. On arriving at the hotel, the young man made straight for the registry and looked over the list of guests. He was disappointed. What the deuce have I come here for? He thought in vexation. Stuck way up here on top of the mountain all alone, no company. Why, it's worse than the office. I must have come either too early or too late. I never do have luck with my holidays. Not a single name do I know. If only there was a woman or two here to pick up a flirtation with, even a perfectly innocent one, if it must be, just to keep the week from being too utterly dismal. The young man, a baron not very high up in the country's nobility, held a government position, and had secured this short vacation not because he required it particularly, but because his colleagues had all got a week off in spring and he saw no reason for making a present of his week off to the government. Although not without inner resources, he was a thoroughly social being, his sociability being the very quality for which his friends liked him and for which he was welcomed in all circles. He was quite conscious of his inability to stay by himself and had no inclination to meet himself, as it were, but rather avoided his own company, feeling not the least urge to become intimately acquainted with his own soul. He knew he required contact with other human beings to kindle his talents and stir up the warmth and exuberance of his spirits. Alone he was like a match in a box, frosty and useless. He paced up and down the hall, completely out of sorts, stopping now and then irresolutely to turn the leaves of the magazines or to glance at the newspapers. or to strike up a waltz on the piano in the music room. Finally, he sat down in a sulk and watched the growing dusk and the grey mist steal in patches between the fir trees. After a long, vain, fretful hour, he took refuge in the dining room. As yet only a few of the tables were occupied. He took them in at a swift glance. No use. No one he knew except responded to the greeting listlessly, a gentleman to whom he had spoken on the train, and farther off a familiar face from the metropolis. No one else. Not a single woman to promise even a momentary adventure. He became more and more impatient and out of sorts. Being a young man favored with a handsome face, he was always prepared for a new experience. He was of the sort of man who are constantly on the lookout for an opportunity to plunge into an adventure for the sake of its novelty, yet whom nothing surprises because, forever lying in wait, they have calculated every possibility in advance. Such men never overlook any element of the erotic. The very first glance they cast at a woman is a probe into the sensual, a searching, impartial probe that knows no distinction between the wife of a friend or the maid who opens the door to her house. One rarely realizes, in using the ready-made word woman hunter, which we toss in contempt at such men, how true the expression is and how much of faithful observation it implies. In their watchful alertness, all the passionate instincts of the chase are afire. The stalking, the excitement, the cruel cunning. They are always at their post, always ready and determined to follow the tracks of an adventure up to the very brink of the precipice, always loaded with passion, not with the passion of a lover, but with the cold, calculating, dangerous passion of a gambler. Some of them are doggedly persevering, their whole life shaping itself, from this expectancy, into one perpetual adventure. Each day is divided for them into 100 little sensual experiences, a passing look, a flitting smile, an accidental contact of the knee, send each year into 100 such days, in which the sensual experience constitutes the ever-flowing, life-giving and quickening source of their existence. There was no partner for a game hereth that the barons experienced, I instantly detected, and there is nothing more exasperating than for a player with cards in his hands, conscious of his ability, to be sitting at the green table vainly awaiting a partner. The Baron called for a newspaper, but merely ran his eyes down the columns fretfully. His thoughts were crippled, and he stumbled over the words. Suddenly he heard the rustling of a dress and a woman's voice saying in a slightly vexed tone, "Maistes toi donc, Edgar." Her accent was affected. A tall, voluptuous figure in silk crackled by his table, followed by a small, pale boy in a black velvet suit. The boy eyed the Baron curiously, as the two seated themselves at a table reserved for them opposite to him. The child was making evident efforts to be correct in his behavior, but propriety seemed to be out of keeping with the dark, restless expression of his eyes. The lady's young man's attention was fixed upon her own Iris, very much toiletted and dressed with conspicuous elegance. She was a type that particularly appealed to the Baron, a Jewess with a somewhat opulent figure, close to, though not yet arrived at, the borderline of overmaturity, and evidently of a passionate nature like his, yet sufficiently experienced to hide her temperament behind a veil of dignified melancholy. He could not see her eyes, but was able to admire the lovely curve of her eyebrows, arching clean and well-defined above a nose delicate yet nobly curved and giving her face distinction. It was her nose that betrayed her race. Her hair, in keeping with everything else about her, was remarkably luxuriant. Her beauty seemed to have grown sated and boastful with the sure sense of the wealth of admiration it had evoked. She gave her order in a very low voice and told the boy to stop making a noise with his fork, this with apparent indifference to the Baron's cautious, stealthy gaze. She seemed not to observe his look, though, as a matter of fact, it was his keen, alert vigilance that had made her constrained. A flash lit up the gloom of the Baron's face. His nerves responded as to an underground current. His muscles tautened, his figure straightened up, fire came to his eyes. He was not unlike the women who require a masculine presence to bring out their full powers. He needed the stimulation of sex completely to energize his faculties. The hunter in him scented the prey. His eyes tried to challenge hers, and her glance crossed his, but waveringly, without ever giving an occasional relaxation of the muscles round her mouth. as if in an incipient smile, but he was not sure, and the very uncertainty of it aroused him. The one thing that held out promise was her constant looking away from him, which argued both resistance and embarrassment. Then, too, the conversation that she kept up with her child encouraged him, being obviously designed for show, while her outward calm, he felt, was forced and quite superficial, actually indicating the commencement of inner agitation. He was aquiver. The play had begun. He made his dinner last a long while, and for a full half-hour, almost steadily, he kept the woman fixed with his gaze, until it had travelled over every line of her face and touched, unseen, every spot of her body. Outside the darkness fell heavily, the woods groaned as if in childish fear of the large, rain-laden clouds stretching out grey hands after them. The shadows deepened in the room, and the silence seemed to press the people closer together. Under the dead weight of the stillness, the Baron clearly noted that the mother's conversation with her son became still more constrained and artificial and would soon, he was sure, cease altogether. He resolved upon an experiment. He rose and went to the door slowly, looking past the woman at the prospect outside. At the door he gave a quick turn, as if he had forgotten something, and caught her looking at him with keen interest. That titillated him. He waited in the hall. Presently she appeared, holding the boy's hand, and paused for a while to look through some magazines and show the child a few pictures. The Baron walked up to the table with a casual air, pretending to hunt for a periodical. His real intention was to probe deeper below the moist sheen of her eyes and perhaps even begin a conversation. The woman instantly turned away and tapped the boy's shoulder. "Wiens, Edgar, Olet." She rustled past the Baron. He followed her with his eyes, somewhat disappointed. He had counted upon making the acquaintance that very evening. Her brusque manner was disconcerting. However, there was a fascination in her resistance, and the very uncertainty added zest to the chase. At all events he had found a partner, and the play could begin. Chapter 2. Quick Friendship. The next morning, on entering the hall, the Baron saw the son of the beautiful unknown engaged in an eager conversation with the two elevator boys, to whom he was showing pictures in a book by Ducello. His mother was not with him, probably not having come down from her room yet. The Baron took his first good look at the boy. He seemed to be a shy, undeveloped, nervous little fellow, about 12 years old. His movements were jerky, his eyes dark and restless, and he made the impression, so often produced by children of his age, of being scared, as if he had just been roused out of sleep and placed in strange surroundings. His face was not unbeautiful, but still quite undecided. The struggle between childhood and young manhood seemed just about to be setting in. Everything in him so far was like dough that has been kneaded but not formed into a loaf. Nothing was expressed in clean lines. Everything was blurred and unsettled. He was at that hobbledehoy age when clothes do not fit and sleeves and trousers hang slouchily, and there is no vanity to prompt care of one's appearance. The child made a rather pitiful impression as he wandered about the hotel aimlessly. He got in everybody's way. He would plague the porter with questions and then be shoved aside, for he would stand in the doorway and obstruct the passage. Apparently, there were no other children for him to play with, and in his child's need for prattle he would try to attach himself to one or other of the hotel attendants. When they had time, they would answer him, but the instant an adult came along they would stop talking and refuse to pay any more attention to him. It interested the Baron to watch the child, and he looked on smiling as the unhappy little creature inspected everything and everybody curiously, while he himself was universally avoided as a nuisance. Once the Baron intercepted one of his curious looks. His black eyes instantly fell when he saw himself observed and hid behind lowered lids. The Baron was amused. The boy actually began to interest him, and it flashed into his mind that he might be made to serve as the speediest means for bringing him and his mother together. He could overcome his shyness, since it proceeded from nothing but fear. At any rate, it was worth the trial. So when Edgar strolled out of the door to pat, in his child's need of tenderness, the pinkish nostrils of one of the bus horses, the Baron followed him. Edgar was certainly unlucky. The driver chased him away rather roughly. Insulted and bored, he stood about aimlessly again, with a vacant, rather melancholy expression in his eyes. The Baron now addressed him. "Well, young man, how do you like it here?" He attempted a tone of jovial ease. The child turned fairly purple and looked up in actual alarm, drawing his arms close to his body and twisting and turning in embarrassment. For the first time in his life, a stranger was the one to address him and not he the stranger. "Oh," he managed to stem out, choking over the last words. "Thank you. You like it?" "You do." "I'm surprised." The Baron laughed. "It's a dull place, especially for a young man like you. What do you do with yourself all day long?" Edgar was still too confused to give a ready answer. Could it be true that this stranger, this elegant gentleman, was trying to pick up a conversation with him, whom nobody had ever before cared a rap about? It made him both shy and proud. He pulled himself together with difficulty. "I read, and we do a lot of walking. Sometimes we go out driving, Mother and I. I am here to get well. I was sick. I must be out in the sunshine a lot," the doctor said. Edgar spoke the last with greater assurance. Children are always proud of their ailments. The danger therein makes them more important, they know, in the eyes of their elders. "Yes, the sun is good for you. It will tan your cheeks. But you oughtn't to be standing round the whole day long. A fellow like you ought to be on the go, running, jumping, playing, full of spirits, and up to mischief, too. It strikes me you are too good. With that big fat book under your arm you look as though you were always poking in the house. By jingo, when I think of the kind of fellow I was at your age, I used to raise the devil, and every evening I came home with torn knickerbockers. Don't be so good, whatever you are." Edgar could not help smiling, and the consciousness of his own smile removed his fear. Now he was anxious to say something in reply, but it seemed self-assertive and impudent to answer this affable stranger, who spoke to him in such a friendly way. He never had been forward and was easily abashed, so that now he was in the greatest embarrassment from sheer happiness and shame. He would have liked to continue the conversation, but nothing occurred to him. Luckily, the great yellow steed, Bernard, belonging to the hotel, came up and sniffed at both of them and allowed himself to be patted. "Do you like dogs?" asked the Baron. "Oh, very much. Grandma has one in her villa at Baines. When we stop there he stays with me the whole time, but that's only in the summer when we go visiting. We have a lot of dogs at home on our estate, a full 2 dozen, I believe. If you behave yourself here I'll make you a present of one, brown with white ears, a pup still. Would you like to have it?" The child turned scarlet with joy. "I should say so." The words fairly burst from his lips in an excess of eagerness. Then he caught himself up and stammered in distress and as if frightened. "But Mother won't allow me to have a dog. She says she won't keep a dog in the house. It's too much of a nuisance." The Baron smiled. The conversation had at last come round to the mother. "Is your mother so strict?" The child pondered and looked up for an instant as if to find out whether the stranger was to be trusted on such slight acquaintance. "No," he finally answered cautiously. "She's not strict, and since I've been sick she lets me do anything I want. Maybe she'll even let me keep a dog. Shall I ask her?" "Oh, yes, please do," Edgar cried delightedly. "If you do I'm sure she'll give in. What does he look like?" "White ears, you said. Can he do any tricks yet?" "Yes, all sorts of tricks." The Baron had to smile at the sparkle of Ajar's eyes. It had been so easy to kindle that light in them. All at once the child's constraint dropped away, and all his emotionalism, kept in check till then by fear, bubbled over. In a flash the shy, intimidated child of a minute before turned into a boisterous lad. If only his mother is transformed so quickly, the Baron thought. If only she shows so much odor behind her reserve. Edgar went at him with 1,000 questions. "What's the dog's name?" Cara, he cried happily, somehow having to answer every word with a laugh of delight. So intoxicated was he with the unexpectedness of having someone take him up as a friend. The Baron, amazed at his own quick success, resolved to strike while the iron was hot and invited the boy to take a walk with him. This put Edgar, who for weeks had been starving for company, into a fever of ecstasy. During the walk the Baron questioned him, as if quite by the way, about a number of apparent trifles, and Edgar in response blurted out all the information he was seeking, telling him everything he wanted to know about the family. Edgar was the only son of a lawyer in the metropolis, who evidently came of a wealthy middle-class Jewish family. By clever, roundabout inquiries, the Baron promptly elicited that Edgar's mother had expressed herself as by no means delighted with her stay in Summering and had complained of the lack of congenial company. He even felt he might infer from the evasive way in which Edgar answered his question as to whether his mother wasn't very fond of his father that their marital relations were none of the happiest. He was almost ashamed at having been able to extract these family secrets from the unsuspecting child, for Edgar, very proud that anything he had to say could interest a grown-up person, fairly pressed confidences upon his new friend. His child's heart beat with pride. The Baron had put his arm on his shoulder while they were walking to be seen in such close intimacy with a man, and gradually he forgot he was a child and talked quite unconstrainedly, as if to an equal. From his conversation it was quite clear that he was a bright boy, in fact, a bit too precocious, as are most sickly children who spend much time with their elders, and his likes and dislikes were too marked. He took nothing calmly or indifferently. Every person or thing was discussed with either passionate enthusiasm or a hatred so intense as to distort his face into a mean, ugly look. There was something wild and jerky about his manner, accentuated perhaps by the illness he was just recovering from, which gave his talk the fieriness of fanaticism. His awkwardness seemed to proceed from the painfully suppressed fear of his own passion. Before the end of half an hour the Baron was already holding the boy's throbbing heart in his hands. It is so infinitely easy to deceive children, those unsuspecting creatures whose love is so rarely courted. All the Baron needed to do was to transport himself back to his own childhood, and the talk flowed quite naturally. Edgar felt himself in the presence of an equal, and within a few minutes had lost all sense of distance between them, and was perfectly at ease, conscious of nothing but bliss at having so unexpectedly found a friend in this lonely place. And what a friend! Forgotten were all his mates in the city where he lived, those little boys with their thin voices and inexperienced chatter. This 1 hour had almost expunged their faces. All his enthusiasm and passion now belonged to this big friend of his. On parting, the Baron invited him to take a walk with him again the next morning. Edgar's heart expanded with pride, and when from a little distance away the Baron waved back to him like a real playmate, it was probably the happiest moment in his life. It is so easy to deceive children. The Baron smiled as he looked after the boy dashing away. The go-between had been one. Edgar, he knew, would bore his mother with stories of the wonderful Baron and would repeat every word he had said. At this he recalled complacently how cleverly he had woven in some compliments for the mother's consumption. "Your beautiful mother," he had always said. There was not the faintest shadow of doubt in his mind that the communicative boy would never rest until he had brought him and his mother together. No need now to stir a finger in order to shorten the distance between himself and the lovely unknown. He could dream away idly and feast his eyes on the landscape, for a child's eager hands, he knew, were building the bridge for him to her heart. Chapter 3. The trio, the plan, as appeared only an hour later, proved to be excellent. It worked without a hitch. The Baron chose to be a little late in entering the dining room, and when Edgar saw him, he jumped up from his seat and gave him an eager nod and a beatific smile, at the same time pulling his mother's sleeve, saying something to her hastily, and pointing conspicuously to the Baron. His mother reproved him for his demonstrativeness. She blushed and showed genuine discomfort, but could not help yielding to the boy's insistence and gave a glance across at the Baron. This the Baron instantly seized upon as the pretext for a deferential bow. The acquaintance was made. The lady had to acknowledge his bow, yet from now on she kept her head bent still lower over her plate and throughout the rest of the meal sedulously avoided looking over at the Baron again. Not so Edgar. Every minute or two he turned his eyes on the Baron, and once he even tried to speak to him across the two tables, an impropriety which his mother promptly checked with a severe rebuke. As soon as dinner was over, Edgar was told he must go straight to bed, and an eager whispering began between him and his mother, which resulted in a concession to the boy. He was allowed to go to the Baron and say goodnight to him, The Baron said a few kind words and so set the child's eyes ablaze again. Here the Baron rose and in his adroit way, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, stepped over to the other table and congratulated his neighbor upon her bright, intelligent son. He told her what a pleasant time he had spent with him that morning. Edgar beamed and then inquired about the boy's health. On this point he asked so many detailed questions that the mother was compelled to reply, and so was drawn irresistibly into a conversation. Edgar listened to it all in a sort of rapturous awe. The Baron gave his name to the lady. The high sound of it, it seemed to him, made an impression on her. At any rate she lost her extreme reserve, though retaining perfect dignity. In a few minutes she took leave, on account of Edgar's having to go to bed, as she said by way of a pretext. Edgar protested he was not sleepy and would be happy to stay up the whole night. But his mother remained obdurate and held out her hand by way of good night to the Baron, who shook hands with her most respectfully. Edgar did not sleep well that night. A chaos of happiness and childish despair filled his soul. Something new had come to him that day. For the first time, he had played a part in the life of adults. In his half-awake state, he forgot that he was a child and all at once felt himself a grown man, brought up an only child and often ailing. He had never had many friends. His parents, who paid little attention to him, and the servants had been the only ones to meet his craving for tenderness. The power of love is not properly gauged if it is estimated only by the object that inspires it, if the tension preceding it is not taken into account, that gloomy space of disillusionment and loneliness which stretches in front of all the great events of the heart. In Edgar there had been a heavily fraught, unexpanded emotion lying in wait, which now burst out and rushed to meet the first human being who seemed to deserve it. He lay in the dark, happy and dazed. He wanted to laugh, but had to cry, for he loved the Baron as he had never loved friend, father, mother, or even God. All the immature passion of his ending boyhood wreathed itself about his mental vision of the man whose very name had been unknown to him a few hours before. He was wise enough not to be disturbed by the peculiar, unexpected way in which the new friendship had been formed. What troubled him was the sense of his own unworthiness and insignificance. Am I fit company for him? He plagued himself. I, a little boy, 12 years old, who has to go to school still and am sent off to bed at night before anyone else. What can I mean to him? What have I to offer him? The painful sense of his impotence to show his feelings in some way or other made him most unhappy. On other occasions, when he had taken a liking for a boy, the first thing he had done was to offer to share his stamps and marbles and jacks. Now such childish possessions, which only the day before had still had vast importance and charm in his eyes, had depreciated in value. They seemed silly. He disdained them. He couldn't offer such things to his new friend. What possible way was there for him to express his feelings? The sense that he was small, only half a being, a mere child of 12, grew upon him and tortured him more and more. Never before had he so vehemently cursed his childhood, or longed so heartily to wake up in the morning the person he had always dreamed of being, a man, big and strong, grown up like the others. His restless thoughts were mixed with the first bright dreams of the new world of manhood. Finally, he fell asleep with a smile on his lips, but his sleep was constantly broken by the anticipation of the next morning's appointment. At 7 o'clock he awoke with a start, fearful that he was too late already. He dressed hastily and astonished his mother when he went in to say good morning, because she had always had difficulty getting him out of bed. Before she could question him, he was out of her room again. With only the one thought in his mind, not to keep his friend waiting, he dawdled about downstairs in the hotel, even forgetting to eat breakfast. At 9:30, the Baron came sauntering down the lobby with his easy air, no indication that anything had been troubling him. He, of course, had completely forgotten the appointment for a walk, but he acted as though he were quite ready to keep his promise when the boy came rushing at him so eagerly. He took Edgar's arm and paced up and down the lobby with him leisurely. Edgar was radiant, although the Baron gently but firmly refused to start on the walk at once. He seemed to be waiting for something. Every once in a while he gave a nervous glance at one of the various doors. Suddenly he drew himself up. Edgar's mother had entered the hall. She responded to the Baron's greeting and came up to him with a pleasant expression on her face. Edgar had not told her about the walk. It was too precious a thing to talk about, but now the Baron mentioned it and she smiled in approval. Then he went on to invite her to come along, and she was not slow in accepting. That made Edgar sulky. He gnawed at his lips. How provoking of his mother to have come into the lobby just then. The walk belonged to him and him alone. To be sure, he had introduced his friend to his mother, but only out of courtesy. He had not meant to share him with anybody. Something like jealousy began to stir in him when he observed the Baron's friendliness to his mother. On the walk, the dangerous sense the child had of his importance and sudden rise to prominence was heightened by the interest the two adults showed in him. He was almost the exclusive subject of their conversation. His mother expressed rather hypocritical solicitude on account of his pallor and nervousness, while the Baron kept saying it was nothing to worry about and extolled his young friend's good manners and pleasant ways. It was the happiest hour of Edgar's life. Rights were granted him that he had never before been allowed. He was permitted to take part in the conversation without a prompt keep quiet. Edgar. He could even express bold desires for which he would have been rebuked before. No wonder the deceptive feeling that he was grown up began to flourish in his imagination. In his bright dreams, childhood already lay behind him like a suit he had outgrown and cast off. At the mother's invitation, the Baron took his midday meal at their table. She was growing friendlier all the time. The vis-vis was now a companion, the acquaintanceship a friendship. The trio was in full swing, and the three voices, the woman's, the man's, and the child's, mingled in harmony. Chapter 4. The Attack. The impatient hunter felt the time had come to creep up on his game. The three-sidedness of the sport annoyed him, and so did the tone of it. To sit there and chat was rather pleasant, but he was after more than mere talk. Social intercourse with the musket puts over desire, always, he knew, retards the erotic between man and woman. Words lose their ardor, the attack its fire. Despite their conversation together on indifferent matters, Edgar's mother must never forget his real object, of which, he was quite convinced, she was already aware. That his efforts to catch this woman were not to prove in vain seemed very probable. She was at the critical age when a woman begins to regret having remained faithful to a husband she has never truly loved, and when the purple sunset of her beauty still affords her a final urgent choice between motherliness and womanliness. The life whose questions seem to have been answered long before becomes a problem again, and for the last time the magnetic needle of the will wavers between the hope for an intense love experience and ultimate resignation. The woman has a dangerous decision to confront, whether she will live her own life or that of her children, whether she will be a woman first or a mother first. The Baron, who was very perspicacious in these matters, thought that he discerned in Edgar's mother this very vacillation between passion to live her own life and readiness to sacrifice her desires. In conversation she always omitted to mention her husband. Evidently he satisfied nothing but her bare external needs and not the snobbishness that an aristocratic way of living had excited in her. And as for her son, she knew precious little of the child's soul. A shadow of boredom, wearing the veil of melancholy in her dark eyes, lay over her life and obscured her sensuousness. The Baron resolved to act quickly, yet at the same time to avoid any appearance of haste. Like an angler who tempts the fish by dangling and withdrawing the bait, he would affect a show of indifference and let himself be courted while he was the one that was actually doing the courting. He would put on an air of haughtiness and bring into sharp relief the difference in their social ranks. There was fascination in the idea of getting possession of that lovely, voluptuous creature simply by stressing his pride, by mere externals, by the use of a high-sounding aristocratic name and the adoption of a cold, proud manner. The chase was already growing hot. He had to be cautious and not show his excitement, so he remained in his room the whole afternoon, filled with the pleasant consciousness of being looked for and missed. But his absence was felt not so much by the woman, upon whom the effect was intended, as by Edgar. To the wretched child it was simple torture. The whole afternoon he felt absolutely impotent and lost. With the obstinate faithfulness of a boy he waited long, long hours for his friend. To have gone away or done anything by himself would have seemed like a crime against their friendship, and he loafed the time away in the hotel corridors, his heart growing heavier and heavier as each moment passed. After a while his heated imagination began to dwell on a possible accident or an insult he might unwittingly have offered his friend. He was on the verge of tears from impatience and anxiety, so that when the Baron came into dinner in the evening, he received a brilliant greeting. Edgar jumped up and, without paying any attention to his mother's cry of rebuke or the astonishment of the other diners, rushed at the Baron and threw his thin little arms about him. "Where have you been? Where have you been? We've been looking for you everywhere." The mother's face reddened at hearing herself included in the search. "Sois sage, Edgar. A side's toy," she said rather severely. She always spoke French to him, though it by no means came readily to her tongue, and if any but the simplest things were to be said she invariably floundered. Edgar obeyed and went back to his seat, but kept on questioning the Baron. "Edgar," his mother interposed, "don't forget that the Baron can do whatever he wants to do. Perhaps our company bores him." Now she included herself, and the Baron noted with satisfaction that the rebuke directed to the child was really an invitation for a compliment to herself. The hunter in him awakened. He was intoxicated, thoroughly excited at having so quickly come upon the right tracks and at seeing the game so close to the muzzle of his gun. His eyes sparkled, his blood shot through his veins. The words fairly bubbled from his lips with no conscious effort on his part. Like all man with pronouncedly erotic temperaments, he did twice as well, was twice himself when he knew a woman liked him, as some actors take fire when they feel that their auditors, the breathing mass of humanity in front of them, are completely under their spell. Naturally an excellent raconteur, with great skill in graphic description, he now surpassed himself. Besides, he drank several glasses of champagne, ordered in honor of the new friendship. He told of hunting big game in India, where he had gone at the invitation of an English nobleman. The theme was well chosen. The conversation had necessarily to be about indifferent matters, but this subject, the Baron felt, would excite the woman as would anything exotic and unattainable by her. The one, however, upon whom the greater charm was exercised was Edgar. His eyes glowed with enthusiasm. He forgot to eat or drink and stared at the storyteller as if to snatch the words from his lips with his eyes. He had never expected actually to see a man who in his own person had experienced those tremendous things which he read about in his books: tiger hunts, brown men, Hindus, and the terrible juggernaut, which crushed thousands of men under its wheels. Until then he had thought such men did not really exist and believed in them no more than in fairyland. A certain new and great feeling expanded his chest. He could not remove his eyes from his friend and stared with bated breath at the hands across the table that had actually killed a tiger. Scarcely did he dare to ask a question, and when he ventured to speak it was with a feverish tremor in his voice. His lively imagination drew the picture for each story. He saw his friend mounted high on an elephant caparisoned in purple, brown man to the right and to the left wearing rich turbans, and then suddenly the tiger leaping out of the jungle with gnashing teeth and burying its claws in the elephant's trunk. Now the Baron was telling about something even more interesting, how elephants were caught by a trick. Old, domesticated elephants were used to lure the young, wild, high-spirited ones into the enclosure. The child's eyes flashed. Then, as though a knife came cutting through the air right down between him and the Baron, his mother said, glancing at the clock, "Neuf heures." Olet. Edgar turned white. To be sent to bed is dreadful enough to grown children at any time. It is the most patent humiliation in adult company, the proclamation that one is still a child, the stigma of being small and needing a child's sleep. But how much more dreadful at so interesting a moment, when the chance of listening to such wonderful things would be lost. Just this one story, mother, just this one story about the elephants. He was about to plead, but bethought himself quickly of his new dignity. He was a grown-up person. One attempt was all he ventured. But that night his mother was peculiarly strict. "No, it's late already. Just go up. Sois sage, Edgar. I'll tell you the story over again exactly the way the Baron tells it to me." Edgar lingered a moment. Usually his mother went upstairs with him, but he wasn't going to beg her in front of his friend. His childish pride made him want to give his pitiful withdrawal somewhat, at least, the appearance of being voluntary. "Will you really? Everything? All about the elephants and everything else?" "Yes, Edgar, everything. Tonight still. Yes, yes. But go on, go to bed now. Edgar was amazed that he was able to shake hands with the Baron and his mother without blushing. The sobs were already choking his throat. The Baron ran his hand good-naturedly through his hair and pulled it down on his forehead. That brought a forced smile to the boy's tense features. But the next instant he had to hurry to the door, or they would see the great tears well over his eyelids and trickle down his cheeks. Chapter V. The Elephants. Edgar's mother stayed at table with the Baron a while longer, but the two no longer spoke of elephants or hunting. An indefinable embarrassment instantly sprang up between them, and a faint sultriness descended upon their conversation. After a time they went out into the hall and seated themselves in a corner. The Baron was more brilliant than ever. The woman was a little heated by her 2 glasses of champagne, so that the conversation quickly took a dangerous turn. The Baron was not what is called exactly handsome. He was simply young and had a manly look in his dark brown, energetic, boyish face, and he charmed her with his fresh, almost ill-bred movements. She liked looking at him at such close range and was no longer afraid to encounter his eyes. Gradually, there crept into his language a boldness which vaguely disconcerted her. It was like a gripping of her body and then a letting go, an intangible sort of desire which sent the blood rushing to her face. The next moment, however, he would laugh again, an easy, unconstrained, boyish laugh, which made his little manifestations of desire seem like joking. Sometimes he said things she felt she ought to object to bluntly, but she was a natural-born coquette, and his trifling audacities only provoked in her the taste for more. She was carried away by his bold gaze, and at length got so far as to try to imitate him, answering his looks with little fluttering promises from her own eyes, and giving herself up to him in words and gestures. She permitted him to draw close to her, so that every now and then she felt the warm graze of his breath on her shoulders. Like all gamblers, the two forgot the passage of time and became so absorbed that they started in surprise when the lights in the hall were turned off at midnight. The woman jumped up in response to the first impulse of alarm she had felt. In the same moment she realized to what audacious lengths she had ventured. It was not the first time she had played with fire, but now her instincts, all roused, told her the game had come perilously close to being in earnest. She shuddered inwardly at discovering that she no longer felt quite secure, that something in her was slipping and gliding down into an abyss. Her head whirled with alarm, with slight intoxication from the champagne, and with the ring of the Baron's ardent language in her ears. A dull dread came over her. She had experienced the same sort of dread several times before in similar dangerous moments, but it had never so overpowered her. This extreme dizziness was something she had never before experienced. "Good night," she said hastily. "See you in the morning again." She felt like running away, not so much from him as from the danger of the moment and from an odd, novel insecurity she felt within herself. But the Baron held her hand in a tight but gentle grip and kissed it 4 or 5 times from the delicate tips of her fingers to her wrist. A little shiver went through her at the graze of his rough mustache on the back of her hand, and her blood ran warm and mounted to her head. Her cheeks glowed. There was a hammering at her temples. A wild unreasoning fear made her snatch her hand away. Don't go, the Baron pleaded in a whisper, but she was already gone, the awkwardness of her haste revealing plainly her fright and confusion. She was undergoing the excitement that the Baron wanted. She was all confused, one moment in awful dread that the man behind might follow and put his arms round her, and the next instant regretting that he had not done so. In those few seconds the thing might have taken place that she had been dreaming of for years, the great adventure. She had always taken voluptuous delight in creeping up to the very edge of an adventure and then jumping back at the last moment, an adventure of the great and dangerous kind, not a mere fleeting flirtation. But the Baron was too proud to push his advantage now, too assured of his victory to take this woman like a robber in a moment of weakness and intoxication. A fair sportsman prefers his game to show fight and to surrender quite consciously. The woman could not escape him. The virus, he knew, was already seething in her veins. She stopped on the landing above and pressed her hand to her throbbing heart. She had to rest a while. Her nerves were snapping. She heaved a great sigh, partly of relief at having escaped a danger, partly of regret. Her emotions were mixed, and all she was vividly conscious of was the whirl of her blood and a faint giddiness. With half-closed eyes she groped her way like a drunken woman to the door and breathed with relief when she felt the cool doorknob in her hand. At last she was safe. She opened the door softly and the next second started back in fright. Something had moved way back in the dark. In her excited state this was too much, and she was about to cry for help when a very, very sleepy voice came from within, saying, "Is that you, Mother? Goodness gracious, what are you doing here?" She rushed to the sofa where Edgar was lying curled up trying to keep himself wide awake. She thought the child must be ill and needed attention. "I waited for you so long, and then I fell asleep." "What were you waiting for?" "You know, to hear about the elephants." "Elephants?" As she asked the question, Edgar's mother remembered her promise. She was to tell him all about the elephant hunts and the Baron's other adventures that very night. And so the simple child had crept into her room, and in unquestioning faith had waited for her until he had dropped asleep. The absurdity of it enraged her, or rather she was angry with herself, and for that reason she wanted to outshriek the tiny whisper of her conscience telling her she had done a shameful wrong. "Go to bed at once, you nuisance," she cried. Edgar stared at her. Why was she so angry? He hadn't done anything wrong, but his very amazement only made her angrier. "Go to bed at once," she shouted, in a rage, because she felt how unjust she was to the child. Edgar went without a word. He was dreadfully sleepy and felt only in a blur that his mother had not kept her promise and that somehow or other he was being treated meanly. Yet he did not rebel. His susceptibilities were dulled by sleepiness. Besides, he was angry with himself for having fallen asleep while waiting. Like a baby, he said to himself in disgust before dropping off to sleep again. Since the day before he hated himself for being still a child. Chapter 6. Skirmishing the Baron had passed a bed night. It is rather vain to attempt to sleep after an adventure that has been abruptly broken off. Tossing on his bed and starting up out of oppressive dreams, the Baron was soon regretting that he had not seized the moment. The next morning when he came down he was still sleepy and cross and in no mood to take up with Edgar, who at sight of him rushed out of a corner and threw his arms about his waist and began to pester him with 1,000 questions. The boy was happy to have his big friend to himself once more without having to share him with his mother. He implored him not to tell his stories to her, but only to himself. In spite of her promise, she had not recounted all those wonderful things she had said she would. Edgar assailed the Baron with 100 childish importunities and stormy demonstrations of love. He was so happy at last to have found him again and to be alone with him. He had been waiting for him since early in the morning. The Baron gave the child rough answers. That eternal lying in wait, those silly questions in short, the boy's unsolicited passion began to annoy him. He was tired of going about all day long with a puppy of 12, talking nonsense. All he cared for now was to strike while the iron was hot and get the mother by herself, the very thing it was difficult to do with this child forever inflicting his presence. For the first time, the Baron cursed his incautiousness in having inspired so much affection, for he saw no chance, on this occasion at least, to rid himself of his too devoted friend. At any rate, it was worth the trial. The Baron waited until 10 o'clock. The time Edgar's mother had agreed to go out walking with him. He sat beside the boy, paying no attention to his chatter and even glancing through the paper, though every now and then tossing the child a crumb of talk so as not to insult him. When the hour hand was at 10 and the minute hand was just reaching 12, he asked Edgar, as though suddenly remembering something, to do him a favor and run across to the next hotel and find out if his cousin, Count Rosny, had arrived. Delighted at last to be of service to his friend, the unsuspecting child ran off as fast as his legs would carry him, careering down the road so madly that people looked after him in wonder. Count Rosny, the clerk told him, had not arrived, nor had he even announced his coming. Edgar again made post-haste back to bring this information to his friend. But where was his friend? Nowhere in the hall. Up in his room, perhaps. Edgar dashed up the stairs and knocked at his door. No answer. He ran down again and searched in the music room, the cafe, the verandas, the smoking room. In vain. He hurried to his mother's room to see if she knew anything about the Baron, but she was gone, too. When finally, in his despair, he applied to the porter, he was told the two had gone out together a few minutes before. Edgar waited for their return patiently. He was altogether unsuspecting and felt quite sure that they would come back soon because the Baron wanted to hear whether or not his cousin had arrived. However, long stretches of time went by, and gradually uneasiness crept upon him. Ever since the moment when that strange, seductive man had entered his little life, never as yet tinged by suspicion, the child had spent his days in one continual state of tension and tremulousness and confusion. Upon such delicate organisms as those of children, every emotion impresses itself as upon soft wax. Edgar's eyelids began to twitch again, and he was already a shade or two paler. He waited and waited, patiently, at first, then in wild excitement, on the verge of tears. Yet no suspicion crept into his child's soul. So blindly trustful was he of his wonderful friend that he fancied there must have been some misunderstanding, and he tortured himself, fearing he had not executed his commission properly. But when they came home at last, how odd that they lingered at the threshold talking gaily without showing the faintest surprise and without, apparently, having missed him very much. "We went out expecting to meet you, Addy," said the Baron, forgetting to ask if the Count had arrived. When Edgar, in consternation that they must have been looking for him on the way between the two hotels, eagerly asseverated that he had taken the straight road and questioned them about the direction they had gone, his mother cut him off short with, "All right, Edgar, all right. Children must be seen and not heard." There, this was the second time, Edgar thought, flushing with anger, that his mother had so horridly tried to make him look small in front of his friend. Why did she do it? Why did she always want to set him down as a child when, he was convinced, he was no longer a child? Evidently she was jealous of his friend and was planning to get him all to herself. Yes, that was it, and it was she who had purposely led the Baron the wrong way. But he wouldn't let her treat him like that again, had shown her. He was going to be spiteful, he wasn't going to say a word to her at table, and he would speak only to his friend. However, it was not so easy to keep quiet as he thought it would be. Things went in a most unanticipated way. Neither his mother nor the Baron noticed his attitude of spitefulness. Why, they did not even pay the slightest attention to him, who, the day before, had been the medium of their coming together. They talked over his head and laughed and joked as though he had disappeared under the table. His blood mounted to his head and a lump came into his throat. A horrid sense of his impotence overwhelmed him. Was it his doom to sit there quietly and look on while his mother stole away from him his friend, the one man he loved, while he, Edgar, made no movement in self-defense and used no other weapon than silence? He felt as though he must get up and pound the table with his clenched fists, just to make them take notice of him, but he restrained himself and merely put down his knife and fork and stopped eating. Even this it was a long time before they observed. It was not until the last course that his mother became conscious that he had not tasted his food and asked him if he were not feeling well. Disgusting, he thought. That's all she ever thinks of, whether I'm sick or not. Nothing else about me seems to matter to her. He told her shortly that he wasn't hungry, which quite satisfied her. Nothing, absolutely nothing forced them to pay attention to him. The Baron seemed to have forgotten him completely. At least he never addressed a single remark to him. His eyeballs were getting hot with suppressed tears, and finally he had to resort to the childlike device of raising his napkin like a screen to hide the traitorous drops that rolled down his cheeks and salted his lips. When the meal finally came to an end, he drew a sigh of relief. During the meal his mother had proposed a drive to an interesting spot in the neighborhood, and Edgar had listened with his lips between his teeth. So she was not going to allow him a single moment alone with his friend anymore. But now, as they got up from table, came something even worse, and Edgar's anger went over into a fury of hate. "Edgar," said his mother, "you'll be forgetting everything you learned at school. You had better stay here this afternoon while we're out driving and do a little studying." He clenched his small fists again. There she was at it again, humiliating him in front of his friend, publicly reminding him that he was still a child who had to go to school and whose presence was merely tolerated by his elders. This time, however, her intentions were altogether too obvious, and Edgar was satisfied to turn away without replying. Insulted again, she said, smiling, and then to the Baron, "Do you really think it's so bad for him to spend in our studying once in a while?" To this a meeting in the child's heart congeletto this the Baron, who called himself his friend and who had made fun of him for being a bookworm, made answer that an hour or two really couldn't do any harm. Was there an agreement between the two? Had they actually allied themselves against him? "My father," said the boy, his eyes flashing anger, "forbade my studying here. He wants me to get my health back here." Edgar hurled this out with all his pride in his illness, clinging desperately to his father's dictum and his father's authority. It came out like a threat, and to his immense astonishment it took effect, seeming actually to have made both of them uncomfortable, his mother especially, for she turned her eyes aside and began to drum on the table nervously with her fingers. For a while there was a painful silence, broken finally by the Baron, who said with a forced laugh, "It's just as you say, Eddie. I myself don't have to take examinations anymore. I failed in all my examinations long ago." Edgar gave no smile, but looked at the Baron with a yearning, searching gaze, as if to probe to the innermost of his being what was taking place in the Baron's soul. Something between him and Edgar had changed, and the child knew not what or why. His eyes wandered unsteadily, in his heart went a little rapid hammer, his first suspicion. Chapter 7. The Burning Secret. What has made them so different? The child pondered while sitting opposite them in the carriage. Why don't they behave toward me as they did at first? Why does Mama avoid my eyes when I look at her? Why does he always try to joke when I'm around and make a silly of himself? They don't talk to me as they did yesterday or the day before yesterday. Their faces even seem different. Mama's lips are so red she must have rouged them. I never saw her do that before. And he keeps frowning as though he were offended. Could I have said anything to annoy them? No, I haven't said a word. It cannot be on my account that they're so changed. Even their manner toward each other is not the same as it was. They behave as though they had been naughty and didn't dare confess. They don't chat the way they did yesterday, nor laugh. They're embarrassed. They're concealing something. They've got a secret between them that they don't want to tell me. I'm going to find it out. I must. I don't care what happens. I must. I believe I know what it is. It must be the same thing that grown-up people always shut me out from when they talk about it. It's what books speak of, and it comes in operas when the man and women on the stage stand singing face to face with their arms spread out, and embrace, and shove each other away. It must have something to do with my French governess, who behaved so badly with Papa and was dismissed. All these things are connected. I feel they are, but I don't know how. Oh, to find it out, at last to find it out, that secret. To possess the key that opens all doors. Not to be a child any longer with everything kept hidden from one and always being held off and deceived. Now or never, I will tear it from them, that dreadful secret. A deep furrow cut itself between the child's brows. He looked almost old as he sat in the carriage painfully cogitating this great mystery and never casting a single glance at the landscape, which was shading into all the delicate colors of the spring. The mountains in the freshened green of their pines, the valleys in the mistier greens of budding trees, shrubbery, and young grass. All he had eyes for were the man and the woman on the seat opposite him, as though, with his hot gaze, as with an angling hook, he could snatch the secret from the shimmering depths of their eyes. Nothing gives so keen an edge to the intelligence as a passionate suspicion. All the possibilities of an immature mind are developed by a trail leading into obscurity. Sometimes it is only a single light door that keeps children out of the world that we call the real world, and a chance puff of wind may blow it open. Edgar, all at once, felt himself tangibly closer than ever before, to the unknown, the great secret. It was right next to him, still veiled and unriddled, but very near. It excited him, and it was this that lent him his sudden solemnity. Unconsciously he sensed that he was approaching the outer edges of childhood. The Baron and Edgar's mother were both sensible of a dumb opposition in front of them without realizing that it emanated from the child. The presence of a third person in the carriage constrained them, and those two dark glowing orbs opposite acted as a check. They scarcely dared to speak or look up, and it was impossible for them to drop back into the light, easy conversational tone of the day before, so entangled were they already in ardent confidences and words suggestive of secret caresses. They would start a subject, promptly come to a halt, say a broken phrase or two, make another attempt, then lapse again into complete silence. Everything they said seemed always to stumble over the child's obstinate silence and fall flat. The mother was especially oppressed by her son's sullen quiescence. Giving him a cautious glance out of the corners of her eyes, she was startled to observe, for the first time, in the manner Edgar compressed his lips, a resemblance to her husband when he was annoyed. At that particular moment, when she was playing hide-and-seek with an adventure, it was more than ordinarily discomfiting to be reminded of her husband. The boy, only a foot or two away, with his dark, restless eyes and that suggestion behind his pale forehead of lying in wait, seemed to her like a ghost, a guardian of her conscience, doubly intolerable there in the close quarters of the carriage. Suddenly, for 1 second, Edgar looked up and met his mother's gaze. Instantly they dropped their eyes in the consciousness that they were spying on each other. Till then each had had implicit faith in the other. Now something had come between mother and child and made a difference. For the first time in their lives they set to observing each other, to separating their destinies, with secret hate already mounting in their hearts, though the feeling was too young for either to admit it to himself. When the horses pulled up at the hotel entrance, all three were relieved. The excursion had been a failure, each of them felt, though they did not say so. Edgar was the first to get out of the carriage. His mother excused herself for going straight up to her room, pleading a headache. She was tired and wanted to be by herself. Edgar and the Baron were left alone together. The Baron paid the coachman, looked at his watch, and mounted the steps to the hall, paying no attention to Edgar, and passed him with that easy sway of his slim back which had so enchanted the child that he had immediately begun to imitate the Baron's walk. The Baron brushed past him, right past him. Evidently he had forgotten him and left him to stand there beside the driver and the horses as though he did not belong to him. Something in Edgar broke into as the man, whom in spite of everything he still idolized, slighted him like that. A bitter despair filled his heart when the Baron laughed without so much as touching him with his cloak or saying a single word, when he, Edgar, was conscious of having done no wrong. His painfully enforced self-restraint gave way, the too heavy burden of dignity that he had imposed upon himself dropped from his narrow little shoulders, and he became the child again, small and humble, as he had been the day before. At the top of the steps he confronted the Baron and said in a strained voice, thick with suppressed hairs, "What have I done to you that you don't notice me any more? Why are you always like this with me now? And Mama, too. Why are you always sending me off? Am I a nuisance to you, or have I done anything to offend you?" The Baron was startled. There was something in the child's voice that upset him at first, then stirred him to tenderness and sympathy for the unsuspecting boy. "You're a goose, Eddie. I'm merely out of sorts today. You're a dear boy, and I really love you." He tousled Ajar's hair, yet with averted face so as not to be obliged to see those great moist, beseeching child's eyes. The comedy he was playing was becoming painful. He was beginning to be ashamed of having trifled so insolently with the child's love. That small voice, quivering with suppressed sobs, cut him to the quick. "Go upstairs now, Eddie. We'll get along together this evening just as nicely as ever. You'll see. You won't let Mama send me right off to bed, will you?" No, I won't, Eddie," the Baron smiled. "Just go on up. I must dress for dinner." Edgar went, made happy for the moment. Soon, however, the hammer began to knock at his heart again. He was years older since the day before. A strange guest, distrust, had lodged itself in his child's breast. He waited for the decisive test at table. 9 o'clock came, and his mother had not yet said a word about his going to bed. Why did she let him stay on just that day of all days, she who was usually so exact? It bothered him. Had the Baron told her what he had said, he was consumed with regret, suddenly, that he had run after the Baron so trustingly. At 10 o'clock his mother rose and took leave of the Baron, who, oddly, showed no surprise at her early departure and made no attempt to detain her as he usually did. The hammer beat harder and harder at Edgar's breast. Now he must apply the task with exceeding care. He, too, behaved as though he suspected nothing and followed his mother to the door. Actually, in that second, he caught a smiling glance that travelled over his head straight to the Baron and seemed to indicate a mutual understanding, a secret held in common. So the Baron had betrayed him. That was why his mother had left so early. He, Edgar, was to be lulled with a sense of security so that he would not get in their way the next day. "Mean," he murmured. "What's that?" his mother asked. "Nothing," he muttered between clenched teeth. He, too, had his secret. Chapter 8. Silent Hostility. The tumult of Edgar's conflicting emotions subsided into one smooth, clear feeling of hate and open hostility, concentrated and unadulterated. Now that he was certain of being in their way, the imposition of his presence upon them gave him a voluptuous satisfaction. Always accompanying them with the compressed strength of his enmity, he would goad them into madness. He gloated over the thought. The first to whom he showed his teeth was the Baron, when he came downstairs in the morning and said hello, Edgar, with genuine heartiness in his voice. Edgar remained sitting in the easy chair and answered curtly with a hard GD morning. "Your mother down yet?" Edgar kept his eyes glued to his newspaper. "I don't know." The Baron was puzzled. "Slapped badly, Eddie." The Baron was counting on a joke to help him over the situation again, but Edgar merely tossed out a contemptuous no and continued to study the paper. "Stupid," the Baron murmured, shrugging his shoulders, and walked away. Hostilities had been declared. Toward his mother, Edgar's manner was cool and polite. When she made an awkward attempt to send him off to the tennis court, he gave her a quiet rebuff, and his smile and the bitter curl at the corners of his mouth showed that he was no longer to be fooled. "I'd rather go walking with you, Mama," he said with assumed friendliness, looking her straight in the eyes. His answer was obviously not to her taste. She hesitated and seemed to be looking for something. "Wait for me here," she decided at length, and went into the dining room for breakfast. Edgar waited, but his distrust was lively, and his instincts, all aster, extracted a secret hostile intent from everything the Baron and his mother now said. Suspicion was beginning to give him remarkable perspicacity sometimes. Instead, therefore, of waiting in the hall as he had been bidden, he went outside to a spot from which he commanded a view not only of the main entrance but of all the exits from the hotel. Something in him scented deception. He hid himself behind a pile of wood, as the Indians do in the books, and when, about half an hour later, he saw his mother actually coming out of a side door carrying a bunch of exquisite roses and followed by the Baron, the traitor, he laughed in glee. They seemed to be gay and full of spirits. Were they feeling relieved at having escaped him to be alone with their secret? They laughed as they talked and turned into the road leading to the woods. The moment had come. Edgar, as though mere chance had brought him that way, strolled out from behind the woodpile and walked to meet them with the utmost composure, allowing himself ample time to feast upon their surprise. When they caught sight of him, they were quite taken aback. He saw and exchanged a glance of astonishment. The child advanced slowly, with an assumed nonchalant air, never removing his mocking gaze from their faces. "Oh, here you are, Eddie. We were looking for you inside," his mother said finally. The shameless liar, the child thought, but held his lips set hard, keeping back the secret of his hate. The three stood there irresolutely, one watchful of the others. "Well, let's go on," said the woman, annoyed but resigned, and plucked one of the lovely roses to bite. Her nostrils were quivering, a sign in her of extreme anger. Edgar stood still, as though it were a matter of indifference to him whether they walked on or not, looked up at the sky, waited for them to start, then followed leisurely. The Baron made one more attempt. "There's a tennis tournament today. Have you ever seen one?" The Baron was not worth an answer any more. Edgar merely gave him a scornful look and pursed his lips for whistling. That was his full reply. His hate showed its bared teeth. Edgar's unwished-for presence weighed upon the two like a nightmare. They felt very like convicts who follow their keeper, gritting their teeth and clenching their fists in secret. Edgar neither did nor said anything out of the way, yet he became, every moment, more unbearable to them, with his watchful glances out of great moist eyes and his dog's sullenness, which was like a prolonged growl at any attempt they made at an advance. "Go on ahead of us," his mother suddenly snapped, made altogether ill at ease by his intent listening to everything she and the Baron were saying. "Don't be hopping right at my toes. It makes me fidgety." Edgar obeyed, but at every few steps he would face about and stand still, waiting for them to catch up if they had lingered behind, letting his gaze travel over them diabolically and enmeshing them in a fiery net of hate in which, they felt, they were being inextricably entangled. His malevolent silence corroded their good spirits like an acid. His gaze dashed extinguishing gall on their conversation. The Baron made no other attempts to court the woman beside him, feeling, infuriatedly, that she was slipping away from him because her fear of that annoying, obnoxious child was cooling the passion he had fanned into a flame with so much difficulty. After repeated unsuccessful attempts at a conversation, they jogged along the path in complete silence, hearing nothing but the rustling of the leaves and their own dejected footsteps. There was active hostility now in each of the three. The betrayed child perceived with satisfaction how their anger gathered helplessly against his own little, despised person. Every now and then he cast a shrewd, ironic look at the Baron's sullen face and saw how he was muttering curses between gritted teeth and had to restrain himself from hurling them out at him. He also observed with sarcastic glee how his mother's fury was mounting and that both of them were longing for an opportunity to attack him and send him away or render him innocuous. But he gave them no opening. The tactics of his hate had been prepared too well in advance and left no spots exposed. "Let us go back," his mother burst out, feeling she could no longer control herself and that she must do something, if only cry out, under the imposition of this torture. "A pity," said Edgar quietly. "It's so lovely." The other two realized the child was making fun of them, but they dared not retort, the tyrant having learned marvelously in today's the supreme art of self-control. Not a quiver in his face betrayed his mordant irony. Without another word being spoken, they retraced the long way back to the hotel. When Edgar and his mother were alone together in her room, her excitement was still seething. She tossed her gloves and parasol down angrily. Edgar did not fail to note these signs and was aware that her electrified nerves would seek to discharge themselves, but he courted an outburst and remained in her room on purpose. She paced up and down, seated herself, drummed on the table with her fingers, and jumped up again. "How untidy you look. You go around filthy. It's a disgrace. Aren't you ashamed of yourself, a boy of your age?" Without a word of opposition, Edgar went to his mother's toilet table and washed and combed himself. His cold, obdurate silence and the ironic quiver of his lips drove her to a frenzy. Nothing would have satisfied her so much as to give him a sound beating. "Go to your room," she screamed, unable to endure his presence a second longer. Edgar smiled and left the room. How the two trembled before him, how they dreaded every moment in his presence, the merciless grip of his eyes. The worse they felt, the more he gloated, and the more challenging became his satisfaction. Edgar tortured the two defenseless creatures with the almost animal cruelty of children. The Baron, because he had not given up hope of playing a trick on the lad and was thinking of nothing but the goal of his desires, could still contain his anger. But Ajar's mother was losing her hold upon herself and kept constantly slipping. It was a relief to her to be able to shriek at him. "Don't play with your fork," she cried at table. "You're an ill-bred monkey. You don't deserve to be in the company of grown-up people." Edgar smiled, with his head tipped a trifle to one side. He knew his mother's outburst was a sign of desperation and took pride in having made her betray herself. His manner and glance were now as composed as a physician's. In previous days, he might have answered back rudely so as to annoy her. But hate teaches many things, and quickly. How he kept quiet, and still kept quiet, and still kept quiet, until his mother, under the pressure of his silence, began to scream. She could stand it no longer. When they rose from table, and Edgar, with his matter-of-course air of attachment, proceeded to follow her, and the Baron, her pent-up anger suddenly burst out. She cast prudence to the winds and let out the truth. Tortured by his crawling presence, she reared like a horse pastured by crawling flies. "Why do you keep tagging after me like a child of 3? I don't want you around us all the time. Children should not always be with their elders. Please remember that. Spend an hour or two by yourself for once. Read something, or do whatever you want. Leave me alone. You make me nervous with your creepy ways and that disgusting hangdog air of yours. He had wrested it from her at last confession. He smiled, while the Baron and his mother seemed embarrassed. She swung about, turning her back, and was about to leave, in a fury with herself for having admitted so much to her little son, when Edgar's voice came, saying coolly, "Papa does not want me to be by myself here. He made me promise not to be wild and to stay with you." Edgar emphasized Papa, having noticed on the previous occasion when he used the word that it had had a paralyzing effect upon both of them.